second part of week 3. And in this part, we will talk about capitalistic agricultural practices and rice consumption among Koreans during colonial period. Rice production rapidly increased since 1910 because of Japanese companies bringing new technologies, and Japanese government tried to increase rice production in Korea. Even though rice production itself has rapidly increased, interestingly, the per capita rice consumption by every Korean didn't really increase, which is very interesting. And now, why was that? Of course, during the war, after 1937 especially, and until the end of the Pacific War in 1945, Korean farmers were not free to sell their rice because Japanese government would take them, would buy them in a lower price than market price. Before then, Korean farmers would sell their rice rather than consuming all of them. And why? Because in grain market in general, rice fetched much higher price, while non-rice crops such as wheat, barley, and those were cheaper. So naturally, by economic logic, the Korean farmers after reserving minimum amount of rice that is necessary for them, they would sell rice. And then because with that money, they could buy more grains, particularly after 1932, when cheaper Manchurian grains were available in Korean market. However, this story would change after 1937, when Japan started the so-called Second Sino-Japanese War, and now there was a huge war between Japan and China, and the theater was entire China. So many Japanese soldiers were in China, and there was a need to feed them. So Japanese government in the end, they confiscated rice, but they imposed upon the forced selling of rice to Japanese government at a lower price than market price. And that's why Korean consumption of rice actually declined during this period. Nevertheless, according to many researchers, the general health and especially life expectancy of Koreans actually improved through the colonial period in general. And now, that's not because Koreans were able to eat more rice, but that's thanks to improved sanitation practices and improved nutrition, because they also other food was available, and medicine, and particularly the level of education. However, this was a global trend of the time. All over in the world, with Western medicine and education, even in the colonies of the Western countries, there are also people's life improved. Okay, so specifically how rice consumption happened during the colonial period. And as I mentioned, rice production itself went up quite rapidly, but often, a lot of rice was sold to Japanese market. Koreans and consumed non-rice crops. And as I said, that's because Korean farmers sold their rice, which fetched much higher price. And then they would buy cheaper grains imported from Manchuria. And after the war, of course, now Korean farmers had to sell their rice to colonial government at a set price, and often that was lower than market price. And that reduced the consumption of rice. And from the image here on this page, you see that this is in Kunsan. Kunsan was the major port in Jeollabuk-do, and because that Jeollanam-do and Buk-do, that was the rice basket of the Korean peninsula. So large Japanese companies came and they, through irrigation and reclamation, they increased the rice field. And all the rice produced, most of the rice produced there, and would be exported to Japan. And in this image, you see that the harvested rice is milled in this factory where Korean workers work. There are debates among researchers that if Koreans generally became healthier or unhealthier during colonial period. This is a natural, quite natural debate, but researches show in general, as it happened elsewhere globally, the Korean health has improved. Life expectancy of Koreans became longer, especially until the end of the 1930s. But 1940s is a slightly different story because even in Japan, people ate less because now it is wartime. So Japan entered into war, the Pacific War with America in the end of 1941, and the entire Japanese empire, the food production was disturbed, and a lot of food had to be sent to the military. So in general, both in Japan and its colonies, the food consumption was disturbed. So except that part, in general, it seems to be that in any colonies, the people's health improved. Nevertheless, there are also other researches, and the same researchers also acknowledge that, yes, physical health might have been improving, but the mental health became worse. And now that's quite understandable because this colonial period, particularly in Korea, rapid modern industrialization and urbanization happened. And when traditional society changes so rapidly, people lose their traditional values and social connections and so on, and they are exposed to these frictions and their mental health goes down. That's quite common. In the next part, we will talk about what new food items and cooking methods were introduced to Korea during this period.